Istanbul. Early spring, 1983. The city where Europe died and Asia began, where every alley held 3 secrets and every secret had 5 owners. I was sitting in a cafe off Istiklal Avenue, drinking Turkish coffee that could strip paint off a destroyer when the message came through. Simple, direct, goddamn impossible. Target, Soviet Rear Admiral Konstantin Volkov. Objective, naval encryption codes. Timeline, 72 hours. Now let me tell you something about 72 hours. That's not a timeline. That's a suicide note with a clock attached. But here's the thing about being a warrior, and I mean a real warrior. Not some desk-bound shitbird who thinks tactics come from PowerPoint slides. A warrior is a guy who wishes to be involved, period. Doesn't matter if the mission sounds like it was dreamed up by someone who failed basic math. Doesn't matter if the odds make Russian roulette look like a safe bet. You volunteer for everything going. Everything. What sounds insignificant might be cover for something critical. What sounds impossible might just be Tuesday. I was operating under maritime shipping consultant cover, perfect for Istanbul. The Bosphorus Strait was a highway for commercial traffic, Soviet naval movements, and enough intelligence work to keep 3 agencies busy. My cover was solid. I'd been working it for 8 months, knew the shipping schedules better than most port authorities, spoke enough Turkish to do business and enough Russian to eavesdrop. That's force multiplication right there. Language capability transforms everything. You're not dependent on some local asset who might be working both sides. You hear it yourself, process it yourself, own it yourself. The intelligence packet was thin. Admiral Volkov, 52 years old, career Baltic Fleet officer, recently transferred to Mediterranean Operations Command, widower, heavy drinker, liked to shore leave at specific establishments when his vessel docked in Istanbul. The Soviet Navy used Istanbul as a neutral port for resupply and crew rest, part of the whole Black Sea Treaty arrangement. Turkish authorities looked the other way as long as everyone behaved. It was a gentleman's agreement built on decades of careful diplomacy and mutual financial interest. The encryption codes were the prize. Soviet naval communications in the Mediterranean theater ran through a rotating cipher system. Physical code books, updated monthly, distributed to flag officers only. Volkov carried one. We needed it, not a copy, not photographs. The actual goddamn code book. 48 hours to acquire, 12 hours to process, 12 hours to return it before Volkov's ship departed for Sevastopol. Impossible? Sure. Impossible is just a starting point. The briefing officer, some company man who probably thought field work meant lunch meetings in Georgetown, laid out what they called the operational approach. Get close to Volkov, gain his trust, create an opportunity, extract the codes. I listened to this bullshit for about 10 minutes before I stopped him. You're telling me to befriend a Soviet admiral in 72 hours and rob him blind? We're suggesting a relationship-based approach to... He drinks, I said. That's the play. Mr. Waugh, we can't simply... He drinks heavy. Widower drinks heavier. Lonely drinks heaviest. I get him drunk enough, he'll hand me his goddamn pension. Trust me. The officer looked uncomfortable. These headquarters types always did when you stripped away the fancy language and showed them what intelligence work actually was. Not elegant, not clean, just humans exploiting human weakness for national advantage. The Soviets did it to us, we did it to them. That's the game. There are risks with that approach, he said. There are risks with breathing in this business. You want the codes or you want a dissertation on cultural sensitivity? He authorized the operation. First rule of any operation, know your target better than he knows himself. I had 36 hours before Volkov's ship docked. That meant surveillance, pattern analysis, and building the approach vector. I started with the establishments. Istanbul had maybe 24 places where Soviet naval officers felt comfortable during shore leave. The Turks ran these spots carefully, neutral ground. No politics, no provocations, just good food, strong drink, and enough discretion that both NATO and Warsaw Pact personnel could pretend they weren't sitting 3 tables apart. Volkov preferred a place called the Galata House, waterfront dive in the old section below the tower. The owner was an Armenian who'd survived more regime changes than most people had birthdays. Smart man. He knew every intelligence service in the Eastern Mediterranean had people watching his establishment, and he made damn sure everyone stayed civil. Fighting was bad for business. I spent a full day watching the Galata House, not inside too early for that. I worked the periphery, watched foot traffic, noted arrival times, observed the patterns of life that people don't even know they're broadcasting. Soviet officers arrived in groups, never alone. Usually 4 to 6 men, mixed ranks. They'd stay 2 to 3 hours. Drinking patterns were consistent. Vodka for the first hour, switching to beer after that. The groups would break apart around the 90-minute mark. Senior officers would cluster at one end of the bar. Junior officers would drift toward the back rooms where card games ran. Volkov was different. He showed up with his people but always ended up alone. The other officers would leave around 10 o'clock back to the ship before curfew. Volkov would stay sometimes until midnight, sometimes until the owner started stacking chairs. That was my opening. Loneliness is predictable. Grief is exploitable. I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling you how it works. The second day, I went inside. Mid-afternoon, before the evening crowd. The Armenian owner was behind the bar, polishing glasses that didn't need polishing, the universal sign of a man thinking through problems. I'm looking for a quiet place to do business, I said in Turkish. Someone told me this was the spot. He looked me over. Cargo pants, work boots, canvas jacket. I looked like exactly what my cover claimed. A shipping consultant who'd spent too much time in too many ports. What kind of business, he asked. The kind where people talk and nobody remembers in the morning. He smiled. Not friendly, just acknowledging the game. You want a corner table, away from the windows. Come after 8 o'clock. How's the vodka? Russian. The real stuff, not the tourist shit. Good. I'll need a bottle and 2 glasses tomorrow night. He nodded, didn't ask questions. That's what 300 years of Ottoman intelligence culture teaches you. Curiosity kills more than cats. I spent the rest of that day building my legend. Walked the docks, talked to dock workers, made myself visible as the shipping consultant, asked questions about Soviet cargo vessels, tonnage requirements, loading schedules, all legitimate business, all completely boring. The best cover is the one that makes people's eyes glaze over when you explain it. By the time Volkov's ship docked the next morning, I was already part of the scenery. The ship was the Starozovoy, a Krivak-class frigate, 1,200 tons of Cold War paranoia wrapped in steel plating and surface-to-air missiles. She tied up at the commercial pier just after 7 o'clock in the morning. Standard Soviet protocol. Half the crew on liberty, half aboard. Officers rotated in 6-hour shifts. Volkov had the evening liberty slot. I watched from a cafe across from the pier, drank more goddamn Turkish coffee, watched the crew disembark, young sailors, maybe 19 or 20 years old, excited to be off the ship. They headed straight for the cheap restaurants and cheaper bars. The officers were different, older, more careful. They moved in pairs, never alone, always watching. Volkov came down the gangway around 6:30 that evening, alone. That was unusual. Flag officers usually traveled with at least one aide. But Volkov walked by himself, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, the posture of a man who'd stopped giving a damn about regulations. He carried a leather satchel, old, well-worn. The kind of bag that holds important shit because it's been holding important shit for 20 years and habit is stronger than security protocol. That was my code book, right there, round leather, brass clasps, 30 feet away. All I had to do was become this man's best friend in the next 4 hours and rob him blind before midnight. The Galata house filled up around 8 o'clock. I was already there. Corner table, like the owner suggested, away from windows. Good sight lines to the door and the bar. Old habits. You never sit with your back exposed. Never. Volkov arrived at 8:15, right on schedule. He came alone, nodded to the owner, took his usual spot at the bar. The owner poured vodka without being asked. Volkov drank it in one pull. Poured himself a second from the bottle the owner left. That one he sipped. I waited. Patience is its own weapon. Russian approach and you blow the whole operation. The target needs to choose you, not the other way around. Needs to feel like his idea. 3 other Soviet officers were in the bar. Junior ranks. They acknowledged Volkov with stiff nods but kept their distance. The Soviet Navy ran on hierarchy like a monastery runs on prayer. You didn't approach a flag officer unless he summoned you, period. Volkov ordered food. Some kind of lamb dish. Barely touched it, just pushed it around the plate while working through the vodka bottle. By 9 o'clock he was 4 drinks deep and staring at nothing. That's when I made my move. I walked to the bar, ordered vodka. The real Russian stuff, not the tourist shit. The owner poured. I raised the glass toward Volkov. To the sea, I said in Russian. Not perfect Russian, decent Russian with a slight American accent. Enough to show I'd learned it in-country, not from some language lab. Volkov looked at me. Suspicious at first, then curious. You're American. I'm a guy who works on the water. Nationality doesn't matter much when the Bosphorus is kicking up 4-foot swells. He smiled. Small, tight, but real. You work the strait? Shipping consultant. I make sure cargo gets from point A to point B without someone stealing it, sinking it, or declaring it contraband. I gestured to the empty stool beside him. Mind if I sit? Standing makes my knees hurt like hell. He shrugged. Permission granted. I sat, ordered another vodka. We drank in silence for maybe 5 minutes. That's a test. Most people can't handle silence. They fill it with bullshit. But if you can sit quiet with another man, share a bottle, and not need to perform, that's when trust starts. Constantine, he finally said, offering his first name. Not his rank. That was significant. Billy. We shook hands. His grip was firm, measured, the handshake of a man who'd been career military long enough to know when to apply pressure and when to ease off. Billy is not a Russian name, he said, and Constantine isn't an American one. Here we are anyway. He laughed, actually laughed. The vodka was working. What brings an American shipping consultant to a place like this? Same thing that brings a Soviet naval officer to a place like this. The water, the work, and the fact that everywhere else is full of shitbirds who don't understand either. That got a real reaction. His eyes sharpened. Shitbirds? You don't have that term in Russian? Incompetent superiors. Political officers who've never been to sea. Headquarters types who think maritime operations can be run from a goddamn conference room. Ah, yes, we have this term. Many terms for this. He poured another vodka. We call them karandash, pencil pushers. Also duraki, fools. You understand this word? I understand it well enough to know I've worked for several. We drank. The conversation opened up. Shipping routes in the Black Sea, Turkish port authorities and their creative interpretation of international maritime law, the incompetence of civilian ship captains who thought GPS made them experts. We traded stories. His were better than mine. 30 years of Soviet naval service gave him material I couldn't match. I listened more than I talked. Let him fill the space. Let him feel heard. By 10 o'clock, we'd killed 1 bottle and started another. His face was flushed, speech slightly slurred. Not drunk, not yet, but getting there. Your Russian is good, he said. Where did you learn? Mediterranean. The Black Sea ports. You pick it up when you need to. Language is survival out here. Truth. My English is terrible. I try, but... He gestured vaguely. The universal sign of linguistic defeat. Your English is fine. Better than my Russian, probably. You are being kind. I'm being honest. Kindness would be lying to make you feel better. I don't have time for that shit. He raised his glass. To honesty, then. To honesty. We drank. The other Soviet officers left around 10:30. They glanced at Volkov, at me, then departed without a word. Volkov didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He was deep in the vodka now, deep in the conversation, deep in whatever memories he was trying to drown. I lost my wife, he said suddenly. No preamble, just stated it like a weather report. 2 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry? Everyone is sorry. Sorry does not bring her back. He refilled his glass, spilled a little, didn't notice. The Navy gave me 30 days leave, 30 days to grieve, then back to work, back to the ship, back to. He gestured at nothing. This. I didn't respond. Sometimes the best response is silence. Do you have a wife, Billy? Had one. Didn't work out. The job makes that difficult. Yes, the job. He stared into his vodka like it held answers. Always the job. The conversation drifted. His career. The Baltic Fleet. The transfer to Mediterranean operations. The loneliness of command. The weight of responsibility. All the things that military men tell each other when they're drunk enough to admit they're human. By 11 o'clock, he could barely sit straight. The owner started giving me looks, the kind of looks that said, your friend needs to leave before he becomes my problem. I needed to make the play. Now or never. Constantine, I said, you're in no shape to walk back to the ship. Let me help you. He waved me off. I am fine. Fine, fine, fine. The ship is not far. The ship is 2 miles and you can't walk a straight line. Come on, I've got a place nearby. You can sleep it off, get back to your ship in the morning before anyone notices you're gone. He looked at me, suspicious again, but the vodka won. You would do this? I would do this. Why? Because every man deserves one night where he doesn't have to be in command. Every man deserves one night where someone else carries the weight. Tonight, that's me. He nodded slowly, stood up, nearly fell over. I caught him, steadied him. The owner watched us leave, didn't say a word, just went back to polishing glasses. We walked, or rather, I walked, and Volkov stumbled through the dark streets of Istanbul. The safe house was 15 minutes away, a small apartment the company maintained for exactly this kind of operation. Clean, quiet, secure. Volkov was talking the whole way. Rambling about the Black Sea, about his wife, about the stars over the Mediterranean. I kept him moving, kept him talking, kept him from thinking too hard about where we were going or why. The satchel never left his shoulder. Even drunk, even grieving, even half-conscious, he kept that goddamn bag close. 30 years of military discipline doesn't disappear just because you're 4 sheets to the wind. We reached the apartment around 11:30. I got him inside, got him to the couch. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, breathing heavy, eyes half closed. Thank you, Billy, he mumbled. Good man, good friend. Sleep it off, I said. I'll be in the next room. He was unconscious in 30 seconds. I waited 5 minutes, watched his breathing. Deep, regular. He wasn't waking up any time soon. I took the satchel. The satchel sat on the kitchen table. Brown leather, brass clasps, innocent looking, like it held nothing more dangerous than personnel files or requisition forms. I opened it. Inside, 3 folders, a pack of Turkish cigarettes, a photograph of a woman I assumed was his dead wife, and a leather-bound codebook about the size of a paperback novel. Navy blue cover. Cyrillic lettering stamped in gold. Shifrovalnaya kniga, Sredizemnomorski Flot. Encryption book. Mediterranean Fleet. That was it. Right there. The entire Soviet naval communication system for their Mediterranean operations. Current month's codes. Next month's alternates. Emergency protocols. Authentication sequences. Every single piece of information NATO needed to read Soviet naval traffic like a goddamn newspaper. I photographed the cover, and opened it. The codes were organized in a grid system, rows and columns. Each cell contained a 5-digit number group corresponding to specific words, phrases, or tactical commands. Standard encryption methodology, but the specific sequences changed monthly. Without this book, Soviet naval communications were unbreakable. With it, we could read every message between Sevastopol and Damascus. I had a Minox camera, standard intelligence service equipment, small enough to fit in a cigarette pack, good enough resolution to capture document details. I'd used them in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia, in every denied area where you needed information and couldn't exactly walk out with the original. I set up the camera on a makeshift stand, 2 books and a coffee mug, positioned the code book directly underneath, adjusted the lighting. These photographs had to be perfect. Any blurring, any distortion, any intelligence would be worthless. I worked methodically, page by page, frame by frame. The code book was 80 pages. Each page contained roughly 40 code groups. I photographed every single one, both sides of each page, sometimes multiple angles to ensure clarity. The work took 90 minutes. 90 minutes of precision photography while a drunk Soviet admiral slept 15 feet away. 90 minutes of checking and rechecking each frame. 90 minutes of listening to every creak in the floorboards, every sound from the street, every shift in Volkov's breathing. This is what intelligence work actually is. Not glamorous, not exciting, just technical execution under pressure. Just doing one small task correctly while the consequences of failure include international incidents and probably a bullet in the back of your skull. I finished the last page around 1 o'clock in the morning. Checked the camera one final time. All frames good. Clean captures. The film canister contained everything NATO needed. Now came the hard part. Putting it back, I returned the code book to the satchel, exactly where I'd found it. Same orientation, same position relative to the folders and the cigarettes and the photograph. Details matter. If Volkov woke up and something felt wrong, even if he couldn't identify what the operation would compromise, I closed the satchel, set it beside the couch where Volkov was sleeping, made it look like it had just slipped off his shoulder when he passed out. The film canister went into my boot, taped to my ankle. If I got stopped, if I got searched, I'd claim it was personal photographs, family stuff, nothing important. The lie would probably get me killed, but it was better than no story at all. I sat in the kitchen, waited, watched Volkov sleep. This was the dangerous period, the period where the operation could still fall apart. If he woke up suspicious, if he checked the code book immediately, if he noticed anything out of place, the whole thing would collapse. 2 o'clock came and went, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Around 4:30 in the morning, Volkov stirred, groaned, sat up slowly, holding his head like it might split open. "Billy?" His voice was rough, confused. I walked into the room. "Morning. What time is it?" "Around 4:30. You passed out. I let you sleep." He looked around, trying to piece together the previous night. The bar, the vodka, walking through dark streets, nothing threatening, nothing suspicious. Just a drinking buddy who had helped him home. "My head," he said. "Jesus Christ, my head. That's what happens when you kill 2 bottles of Russian vodka in 3 hours. Here," I handed him water. "Drink this. You need to hydrate." He drank, grimaced. "I need to get back to the ship." "Can you walk?" "I can try." He stood up, swayed a little, looked down, saw the satchel, picked it up immediately, checked the clasps, still closed. He visibly relaxed. Whatever was in that bag, and he knew exactly what was in that bag, was still secure. "Thank you," he said, "for last night, for this." He trailed off, probably realizing he couldn't explain why a Soviet rear admiral was thanking an American shipping consultant for getting him drunk and letting him crash on a couch. "Don't mention it," I said. "Seriously, don't mention it to anyone." He smiled. Weak, but genuine. "No, this stays between us." I walked him to the door, gave him directions back to the commercial pier, watched him disappear into the pre-dawn darkness of Istanbul, brown leather satchel over his shoulder, walking slightly unsteady but moving with purpose. He never knew, never suspected, never had any goddamn clue that the code book in his possession had just been photographed, documented, and would be in NATO intelligence hands before noon. That's the game. That's how it works. You don't break into secure facilities. You don't execute elaborate heists. You just find the human weakness, loneliness, grief, alcohol, pride, whatever it is, and you exploit it. The Soviets did it to us. We did it to them. Still do. Always will. I waited until Volkov was completely out of sight. Then I moved. The film canister had to reach the embassy immediately. The company had a courier system, dead drops, signal sites, the whole Cold War tradecraft ballet. But I couldn't risk dead drops. Not with this. Too much chance of compromise. I had to hand it off directly. The embassy didn't open till 8 o'clock, but the Marines guarding the front entrance worked 24-hour shifts. I walked straight up to the gate around 5 in the morning. Still dark. The city just starting to wake up. The Marine Lance Corporal at the gate looked me over. Cargo pants, work boots, canvas jacket, unshaved. Probably smelled like a distillery from sitting in the Galata house all night. "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to speak with the regional security officer right now." "Sir, the embassy doesn't open until—" I leaned close, kept my voice low. "Son, I'm about to say 3 words that are going to make you pick up that phone immediately and wake up whoever you need to wake up. You ready?" He nodded. "Priority flash traffic." His expression changed. Priority flash traffic was the highest classification of intelligence material. Time-sensitive, critical, the kind of thing that got people promoted or fired depending on how fast it moved up the chain. He picked up the phone, made the call. 90 seconds later, a man in khaki pants and a polo shirt came jogging across the embassy courtyard. Regional security officer, probably pissed about being woken up at 0:30. That attitude changed the second I pulled the film canister from my boot. "Jesus Christ," he said. "Is that what I think it is?" Soviet Mediterranean Fleet encryption codes. Current month and next month alternates. All 80 pages. Get it to NSA immediately. He took the canister like it was a live grenade. Do you want the intelligence or do you want a story? Because I'm only giving you one." He chose wisely. Took the canister, disappeared back into the embassy. I never saw him again. The operation was complete, total elapsed time from initial contact to final handoff, 11 hours. The intelligence would be in NSA's hands by midnight, decrypted and analyzed within 48 hours. NATO naval forces in the Mediterranean would be reading Soviet communications like they were addressed to us personally. And somewhere in the Black Sea, Admiral Konstantin Volkov would wake up on his ship with a terrible hangover, fuzzy memories of a friendly American shipping consultant, and absolutely no idea that his entire communication system had just been compromised. That's the game. That's how you win. I walked back through Istanbul as the city woke up. The muezzin's call to prayer echoed from the mosques. Shop owners rolled up their metal shutters. Street vendors set up their carts. 1,000 small movements that meant the day was beginning. I stopped at a cafe, ordered breakfast, Turkish tea, Menemen scrambled eggs with tomatoes and peppers, sat by the window and watched the Bosphorus traffic. Cargo ships, fishing boats, ferries moving between Europe and Asia, all of it normal, all of it routine. Nobody knew what had just happened. Nobody would know for months, maybe years. That's intelligence work. The victories are silent. The defeats are catastrophic. Everything in between is just waiting. I thought about Volkov. Wondered if he'd remember our conversation. Wondered if he'd remember telling me about his dead wife, about the loneliness of command, about all the human things that military men aren't supposed to feel. Probably not. The vodka would have erased most of it. But here's what he'd never know. His loneliness had just cost the Soviet Navy their entire Mediterranean communication security. His grief had just given NATO a strategic advantage that would last until they changed their codes. His humanity had just been weaponized against his own service. That's the part they don't tell you about in training. The part where you exploit someone's pain for national advantage. The part where you become someone's friend, specifically to betray them. The part where you have to look at another human being, someone who's suffering, someone who's lost, someone who's just trying to make it through another goddamn day, and decide that their pain is your opportunity. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. That's the job. That's what warriors do when the shooting stops, but the war continues. We exploit, we manipulate, we take advantage of every weakness, every vulnerability, every human flaw that can be turned into operational advantage. The Soviets would have done the same to us, did do the same to us, probably had a half dozen operations running against American personnel at that exact moment, targeting our loneliness, our grief, our weaknesses. That's the game both sides played. Still play. Always will. I finished my breakfast, paid the bill, walked out into the Istanbul morning. The film canister was gone. The operation was complete. Volkov would rotate back to Sevastopol in 6 weeks. I'd probably never see him again. But for those few hours in the Galata house, sitting at that bar, sharing that vodka, we'd been real. Two men who understood the sea. Two men who understood loneliness. Two men who understood the weight of command and the cost of service. That part wasn't fake. Couldn't be fake. You can't manufacture genuine connection. You can only exploit it after it happens. That's the trick. The connection has to be real for the betrayal to work. 3 months later, word came through the intelligence channels. The Soviets had changed their encryption system, completely overhauled it. New codes, new protocols, new distribution methods. They'd figured out something had compromised their Mediterranean operations. They didn't know what, didn't know when, didn't know who, but they knew. And they'd responded. That's how you measure success in this business. Not by the intelligence you gather, not by the operations you complete, but by how the enemy changes their behavior, by how they adapt, by how they respond to threats they can't even identify. For 3 months, NATO read every Soviet naval message in the Mediterranean like it was the morning newspaper. Ship movements, patrol routes, communication protocols, everything. That intelligence prevented incidents, avoided conflicts, maybe even prevented a war, though we'll never know for sure. And it all came from one drunk Soviet admiral and a shipping consultant who knew how to listen. Now let me tell you what this operation taught me, what it should teach you if you're paying attention. Because the tactical details are interesting, sure, but the principles underneath are what matter. The principles are what last. The principles are what you carry forward when the specific operations fade into history. First principle, volunteer for everything going. Everything. When that message came through Soviet Admiral, encryption codes, 72 hours, I could have said no. Could have argued it was impossible. Could have pointed out the million ways it could go wrong. Instead, I said yes. I said yes immediately. You know why? Because a warrior is a guy who wishes to be involved, period. Not involved in safe things, not involved in easy things, involved in the action. Whatever the action is, wherever it's happening, what sounds impossible might just be Tuesday. What sounds like suicide might just be another operation. You don't know until you try. And if you spend your whole career turning down the hard assignments, waiting for the easy ones, you'll wake up one day and realize you've never actually been tested, never actually proven anything, never actually earned the right to call yourself operational. I volunteered for that mission because I volunteered for everything. Still do. That's not recklessness. That's not stupidity. That's understanding that opportunity doesn't announce itself with trumpets and formal invitations. Opportunity shows up looking like a goddamn suicide mission and waits to see who's brave enough or crazy enough to raise their hand. Second principle, language is force multiplication. I spoke Russian well enough to have that conversation with Volkov. Not perfect Russian, not diplomat Russian, but functional Russian, the kind you learn in country from actual Russians in actual operational environments. That capability, that ability to communicate directly without intermediaries, transformed everything about that operation. Without Russian, I would have needed a translator. With a translator, the whole dynamic changes. The connection becomes artificial. The trust becomes impossible. You can't get a man drunk and steal his secrets if there's a third person at the table managing the conversation. Language learning is survival. You either commit to it or you commit to being dependent on local assets who might be working both sides. Your choice. But understand the choice you're making. Third principle, physical fitness matters, but endurance matters more. This operation didn't require me to run 10 miles or do 100 push-ups, but it required me to stay awake for 36 hours straight. It required me to function clearly after spending 4 hours drinking vodka with a Soviet admiral. It required me to walk through Istanbul at 4 a.m. carrying intelligence that could start a war if it fell into the wrong hands. That's endurance. That's the capacity to keep functioning when your body wants to quit, when your mind wants to quit, when everything in you says stop, but the mission says continue. You build that in training, you prove it in operations, you carry it for your entire career. My only talent is I don't quit. Never have, never will. That's not bravado. That's just fact. When the mission requires 90 minutes of precision photography while a hostile foreign intelligence target sleeps 15 feet away, you don't quit halfway through because your eyes are tired. You finish. You complete the task. You do it right or you don't do it at all. Fourth principle, human intelligence is built on human connection. The entire operation with Volkov worked because the connection was real. I didn't pretend to understand loneliness. I didn't pretend to understand grief. I didn't pretend to understand the weight of command. I actually understood those things, had lived those things, could speak to them authentically. You can't fake genuine connection. The moment you try, the target feels it. Knows something's wrong, maybe can't articulate what, but knows. So the connection has to be real, even if the purpose behind it is operational, even if you're planning to exploit it. The paradox of intelligence work is that the best manipulation requires authentic human understanding. That's the part civilians don't get. They think intelligence work is all lies and deception. It's not. It's selective truth. It's genuine connection with ulterior motive. It's being the person someone needs to talk to while simultaneously being the person who's going to use that conversation against them. I was a real friend to Volkov for those 4 hours. A genuine friend. Someone who listened. Someone who understood. Someone who gave a damn about his pain. And then I took his code book and photographed it while he slept off the vodka. Both things are true. Both things can exist simultaneously. That's the warrior's calculation. That's the choice you make when national security requires you to exploit human vulnerability. The Istanbul operation became case study material, not because it was particularly complex, it wasn't, but because it demonstrated how human intelligence actually works when you strip away all the Hollywood bullshit and government bureaucracy. No elaborate disguises, no high-tech gadgets, no carefully orchestrated scenarios involving a dozen assets and 3 backup plans. Just one operator, one target, and the fundamental understanding that every human being has weaknesses that can be exploited for operational advantage. The company tried to turn it into a formula, tried to create a systematic approach to what they called relationship-based intelligence gathering. They wanted protocols, wanted checklists, wanted a step-by-step process that any officer could follow to replicate the success. I told them they were missing the point. You can't systematize human connection. You can't protocol grief. You can't checklist loneliness. Either you understand people, really understand them, can read them, can connect with them authentically, or you don't. No amount of training is going to give you that if you don't have the basic capacity for human empathy. Here's what I mean. The Istanbul operation worked because I genuinely gave a damn about Volkov's pain, his loss, his loneliness. I wasn't pretending to care. I actually cared. The fact that I was simultaneously planning to rob him doesn't change that. Both things existed at the same time. That's the paradox you have to embrace if you're going to do this work effectively. The officers they sent me to train after Istanbul couldn't grasp that. They'd sit across some practice targets, usually instructors playing roles, and try to manipulate them into revealing information. It was obvious, transparent. The emotional connection was fake, and everyone knew it. You're trying to make them trust you, I'd say. That's backwards. You have to actually be trustworthy in the moment. You have to actually be the person they need. The manipulation comes later, after the trust is genuine. Some of them got it, most didn't. The ones who got it went on to successful careers in human intelligence. The ones who didn't ended up behind desks, analyzing reports written by people who actually understood fieldwork. That's the difference between warriors and bureaucrats. Warriors understand that rules and protocols only get you so far. At some point, you have to make judgment calls based on incomplete information, under pressure, with consequences for failure that include death. Bureaucrats think if you just follow the checklist carefully enough, success is guaranteed. It's not. It never is. The checklist is a starting point. What happens after that is about adaptability, intuition, and the willingness to embrace moral complexity that would make most people uncomfortable. Look at the Istanbul operation. By any conventional moral standard, what I did was wrong. I befriended a lonely, grieving man for the specific purpose of exploiting him, used his vulnerability against him, stole classified material, violated his trust, turned human connection into operational weapon. But by the standards that actually matter, national security, strategic advantage, preventing potential conflict, what I did was necessary. The intelligence we gathered prevented incidents, improved NATO's operational posture, maybe saved lives by giving our forces better situational awareness. Both things are true. I wronged Volkov personally while serving American interests strategically. That's the warrior's burden. That's the calculation you make when the mission requires moral compromise. Some people can't live with that, can't accept that sometimes doing the right thing for your country requires doing the wrong thing to another human being. Those people should find different careers. This one isn't for them. But if you can accept that complexity, if you can hold both truths simultaneously without losing your mind or your moral compass, then maybe you're built for this work. Maybe you understand what it actually means to be operational in environments where the rules are suggestions and success is measured in intelligence gathered, not friendships maintained. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The Cold War ended. The operations that defined my generation of intelligence officers became historical footnotes. But the principles haven't changed. Human vulnerability is still the primary attack surface for intelligence work. Loneliness is still exploitable. Grief is still a weakness. Trust is still something you can build and then weaponize. Different enemies. Same game. The targets now are different. The technology is different. The geopolitical context is different. But the fundamental truth remains. Human intelligence comes from understanding humans, their fears, their needs, their weaknesses, their pain, and being willing to use that understanding for operational advantage. That's what the Istanbul operation taught me. Not tactics, not techniques, not procedures, but principles. Principles that apply whether you're targeting Soviet admirals in '83 or whoever the hell we're targeting now. Volunteer for everything. Learn the language. Stay physically fit. Build genuine connection. Never quit. Accept moral complexity. Understand it. Sometimes the right thing and the wrong thing are the same goddamn action viewed from different perspectives. That's the warrior's calculation. That's the choice you make every time you accept a mission that requires you to be more than a soldier, more than an operator, more than someone who just follows orders and pulls triggers.